When did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
Well, Heidi ho there, everybody. This is your host, Steve Asher, and you are listening to House of Asher. Today, we're going to get into some subjects I really dig, because I'm kind of selfish like that. This is a purely, I guess, sort of narcissistic thing. I get my yeah-yeahs out, with this show. I want to thank everybody, first of all. If you're listening, you may be listening to it on Spotify. Let me see, iHeart, all those other ones, SoundCloud, and all the different ones. But the big one you're probably listening to is the global one, which carries us all around this big ball of wax. That is Paranormal UK Radio. God bless you guys. I thank you for letting me get on here and ramble and talk my silly stuff. Sometimes it's serious, and tonight's gonna get a little not too dark. It's gonna probably have a little gallows humor, but that's okay. I think you guys have learned to roll with that. We're gonna be kind of all over the place. We're definitely gonna be talking about serial killers. We're also gonna be talking about ghosts and other weird, nefarious things, haunted places, haunted people, and everything in between, all over this great nation of ours and across the globe. Our guest tonight is Miss, I'm going to say it wrong, Lorelei Berghr. Correct me, please. Make sure I'm doing
it. It's fine, yeah, Lorelei, but it's fine.
Lorelei.
Everybody always says it wrong, so it's no problem.
Well, I don't know why I put that strong accent on the second part.
People usually do, and you know how I tell people to remember? If you remember the Styx song from the 70s, Lorelei, I was actually named after that song, so it's pretty funny, so I just tell people the Styx song.
Okay. I was trying to think of something like that. I said, yeah, they called me Puff the Magic Dragon after that song, but no. My parents were older, so it would have been something like, oh my God, what's the, like, Camptown Races or something? No, that's probably...
There you go.
That sounds
good, though.
Well, no, I mean, all my folks were like Depression-era folks, and right. So it's that kind of vibe. But anyway, man, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this. This is great.
I'm digging it. So, let's talk a little bit about your background, okay?
Absolutely.
What made you you? What's your Batman origin story? What kind of...
Oh, boy. Well, mine goes back far. I'm 44 now, but so this has been going on for at least 42 years with when it comes to the supernatural or the paranormal with me. That's what got me into all this, plus the serial killer thing. To make a very long story short, since about the age of 2 I don't remember this obviously, but the family does. I would just night terrors and could not be in the dark and would scream and talk about the men in the house and just really bad stuff. And I can remember it maybe back to kindergarten age, maybe 4 or 5, of these men, these people, and seeing these spirits and things like that. And at the time, not knowing what this was. And the house that I live in now that I'm back in, that I was born and raised here, is right down the street from John Wayne Gacy's place. Yes, so my family's been here since 1940. My grandfather actually knew John Wayne Gacy. He was also a contractor. So when this all broke out in the news in 1978, my mother, my grandmother, the whole neighborhood went over there to watch what was going on and couldn't believe it. And watching them take these victims out of the house. They'd go every day, it's like Christmas time. And not until later in life, when I decided to start doing EVP sessions, and when I'm talking like old school, like my boombox and cassettes, like literally trying to figure out what was going on, is when I made the discovery of the connection with serial killers. To make that even shorter, what I've come to believe and have determined is that it was victims of John Wayne Gacy that were actually coming here that I was seeing in the house.
Okay, well let me just jump in right quick. Not everybody. It's just one of those things. It's just like, of course you know about him. Of course you know about,
Right.
Ed Gein and stuff. It's just like like it's like, okay, you got your favorite Saturday morning cartoon as a kid. Who was your favorite serial killer? Everyone who answers that, there's a reason. It tells you a little bit about their personalities and their DNA and whatever, their dark passengers or whatever. What people forget is that like Pogo the Clown was his alternate
Correct.
thing, and he did all kinds of like JC stuff, and he was like a pretty laid back dude, right? He's kind of like,
Absolutely.
he made me think of remember the SNL Dub Bears? Remember those guys with the big mustache?
That was Gacy completely. I mean, he wanted to be admired in the community. He was everybody that knew him. My grandfather even said he was just a nice guy. Like the Chicago vernacular. It was just like, yeah, he's a nice guy. And you never would have thought. The only thing people said about him that was off was that he was a little braggy. He was a little bit of a loudmouth, a little bit of a, braggart. But in Chicago, that's not really,
I'm not saying a word, but no, you're right.
I'll say it because I'm born and raised. I'm Chicago Italian German, so I'll say it. It's true. That's kind of typical here anyway.
Well, you got to stand out. It's a lot of people.
Yeah, he stood out a little bit more than the average with that. And that was the only bad thing that was ever said about the guy, before, obviously, he was, just caught. And, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's so odd about it is the fact that it was almost like you've seen like the 8mm film or 8mm movie, right? Where the guy gets unmasked and he says, you can't wrap your head around it, right? I look just like your neighbor. I look like your uncle or whatever.
Right.
And that's the thing. It was like some crazy coked up person coming out of this area or maybe this really, messed up gang related kind of thing.
Right.
It was just, old Gacy down the street, same guy, whatever, he did that big cakewalk down at Saint whatever's, whatever. So, which was he Catholic? I can't remember.
Yes, he was. He was a very, very devout Catholic, as a matter of fact. Even till the end, before his execution. If you watch like the Walter Jacobson interview, that's basically the only full interview there is on Gacy on video. There's other ones, but they're kind of chopped up. Even on there, he brags constantly about he works with the priest in the prison and he's helped serve communion and he's in the choir and he's this and he's that. And he was like that his whole life. Even when he was in prison the first time in Iowa for his sodomy charges that the Chicago police never knew about, he was in the choir there, very Catholic.
How did he? Because I don't know. I know some about Gacy, obviously, just because he's part of the lexicon. I mean, he's one of those serial killers that really stand out. You got Berkowitz, and you've got like the son, not the Son of Sam guy, the Night Stalker, that guy Ramirez.
Richard Ramirez. You've got Ted Bundy. You've got Kemper.
Sure.
BTK. Yeah, he's in that whole. You're right. Lexicon of serial killers. And at the time, he was considered the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history at the time.
Right. Well, we've got, I should just make mention because let me tip my dark hat to Kentucky. We had the Hart brothers. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Hart brothers. They were considered America's, and I say that kind of parentheses because they were, I think, either English or Scottish mercenaries who would come and attack. They were like highwaymen, but they also had rape gangs, and they did some really gnarly stuff to people. And they would kidnap women and do all this stuff to them, and basically, brainwash them. And then they became like their little servants, and they'd go out and they'd trick men to come out, promising sex, and they would kill them on the streets or out in the country. And then they'd stuff their bodies full of rocks and throw them in the rivers and stuff. They were pretty gnarly. But how did Gacy, and like I said, we can obviously move on to different people, but with Gacy, how did he even try to go, well, like, what was the old vampire Lestat thing? God kills indiscriminately and so shall we. Did he feel that? Did he feel like he was above this and that? Or did he just say, I'm just going to gnaw on this guy?
There's part of it. there are so many layers to him, having, like I said, when I discovered what I believe to be in my home and what was going on, and then Gacy himself years later, which is a completely separate situation, I dove hardcore into researching not only just serial killers, but especially Gacy. And so you've got to look back in time with this. The way that John said it, even into his attorneys, to his defense attorney, to the police, all these interviews that he did, before he came out and said he was innocent all the time. There's a reason. John used to say, even, he said it in the Walter Jacobson interview. He said, I'm innocent. I didn't kill anybody. In John's mind, he believes that because he believes that there was a duality in him. That the other part, and it wasn't Pogo the Clown like people think, his alter personality that did these killings, according to John, was Jack Hanley. Officer Jack Hanley, to be specific, is what he called it. He used to say that Jack Hanley doesn't like homosexuals. Jack Hanley, he must have killed that boy because I don't remember doing that.
Right.
Yeah. It was, and though a lot of people will argue in the serial killer communities and the behavioral sciences, things like that, that no one really knows if that was just John because he was trying to get an insanity plea, in court, or if it was really true.
Well, well, I was just going to say, you would have thought, and that's the reason I was going to ask you if he was Catholic, is that, I'm surprised he didn't say, well, I'm under possession of some otherworldly spirit.
It's strange you bring that up because in my research, which I'm doing with the serial killer experiments specifically, I have it all posted. What I started to see was a pattern in every single like the big serial killers, like you're saying, the lexicon, and even others that are outside of the big lexicon. If you really do your research, even Gacy and Bundy were very similar as far as what friends and family described about them. And they both, Gacy's victim, Jeff Rignall, who has since passed now, but he was one of the boys that did get away. When he testified in court, he said that John's eyes turned black. And that happened with Bundy as well. Where he said it was like he was no longer human. One minute he was jovial and laughing and joking around, and within a split second, it was his face changed, his eyes turned black, and Gacy had light blue eyes, like Bundy.
Yeah, like bright, like very German blue.
Very, and Gacy was Polish, right? So, So according to the, one of the survivors of Gacy, that's the information we have to go on as someone, like him that survived his brutal attack and witnessed the whole thing. And he said it was like he was an animal, that his eyes turned black, his face was distorted, his voice changed, and like he was inhuman. And that was in the court. Like anybody can go on and read the court documents. And so that's part of my whole thing too, is trying to make that connection. Like with these, I'm finding this big connection already. That all these serial killers, it's like they all they either heard voices that told them to do this, their eyes would turn black, they would, all of this supernatural type activity with every one of them.
Well, I mean, it makes me kind of think of when you talk about supernatural stuff, and if we're going old school, right. A lot of times they would say a familiar or a demon or something would appear as, like, say, a black dog or some sort
right.
of wild animal, an owl or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, so you think of like Son of Sam, the dog told me to
sure.
kill. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things you have to kind of look at. I mean, obviously you have to take consideration. When I say this, I say this with a caveat of that would not necessarily explain eyes turning black, but if they had schizophrenia or some other
Correct.
sort of mental ailment or brain damage that causes an issue with hallucinations or whatever, and so yeah, I mean it's it's dicey. Well, and that's what's so funny is that not many people will say that, say that they were possibly possessed by a spirit. And I should ask you in regards of, what you feel a spirit is on my end, and just in the years of researching and stuff that I've done. I'm kind of a centralist in regards of going, I don't know what it is. I know there's an energy. I know that
Right.
in certain hauntings there's definitely an intelligence, apparently, or a reactive, be it crude animal intelligence. But I don't know. I don't know if these are human spirits. I don't know if it's a demonic type entity or something in people. Obviously, I think if it willed you to do something as garish as, murdering and raping kids and things like that,
Right.
it ain't
And people have to,
Jiminy
right,
Cricket.
right. People should understand too. Unfortunately, because of television, everything that is negative now is demon, and that is not the case. I've done hundreds of investigations, all over the United States, and we've run into things that were what we believed were just human spirits that were extremely angry, extremely, dark in their thinking, let's put it that way, that if you didn't know any better, if you weren't, learned in the subject, demon, immediately demon, oh, it's got to be a demon, it's negative. And no, it was a human, and that's what people have to look into too. Not everything that negative, even a growl, because you hear a growl doesn't make something a demon,
Right.
Actually, real demonic activity is extremely rare, and if people would just take the time when they run into things like this to try, I'm not encouraging people, don't go out looking for this stuff, but if you're like me, you've been in this for over 20 years, you're going to come across some pretty dark stuff. And if I wouldn't have held out in certain situations in an investigation and said, wait a minute, I don't believe this to be a demon. And as I further investigated and sat there longer and, didn't run and didn't provoke, or do anything like that, well, we discovered we got EVP of a human, and telling us they're angry and they were killed or they were this, and it makes things different. And I agree with you,
Well,
we don't know everything,
right. Well, let me ask you this, and I'm not Catholic myself, but I've heard, and like, this goes back to listening to like Father Malachi Martin and guys like that, talk about, possession and perfect possession, things like that. Do you feel that you have either the gift or have attuned yourself to having something similar to the gift of discernment?
I don't believe I'm gifted in any way. The way that I look at things is I think that every human being on the planet has an ability naturally. It's whatever you want to call it, whatever label anybody wants to put on it. Just different people, what I believe is, have different degrees of it, and different ways that they have a gift, whether it's audio, visual, mental, whatever. I've just noticed through the years of doing this that where I get sensitive, and I think the more that you investigate, even the more that you put yourself in those situations, the more sensitive you become, where you can sense things, just your body, just like, ooh, like, I don't like this room. There's got to be a reason. And I look back at it like as our ancestors, a fight or flight situation, where we're built like that. We're built to have all of our senses, and some that we don't realize, to keep ourselves alive,
Right. And I think a lot of it is, well, I apologize to jump on you, but it seems that some of the things that we consider as supernatural or preternatural or whatever is just things we forgot to do, forgot we knew.
Right.
Some of that primal lizard brain stuff that
Absolutely
lets you know that something, like the thing where they say, if you think someone's staring at you, you kind of glance around, odds are you're being stared at.
right.
And
It, right?
you can feel it, and it's
That's
just
right.
one of those deals. How many times have you been on site checking something out, and you didn't need a machine going off? Now, I mean, odds are if you had a temperature gauge or whatever, if they're doing some photos, that's a lot of times what I would do. I would know in my what I call my gut, just law enforcement type of stuff. But it's just I'm like, whatever. Please take some shots over here. Please do some temperature stuff. And 9 times out of 10, there's a variation, and then the feeling goes away, the activity goes away.
Exactly. And if it was up to me, the only reason I do use a lot of equipment is it's not for my benefit, because if I'm somewhere and I'm investigating, and like you said, that primal instinct in you, I can hear it with my ear, or I can, feel it, or I can see it with my own eyes. I know it's real. I don't use equipment anymore to prove to me that it's real. I use equipment now to give the world the evidence, to let everyone else out there see this is what was captured at this location. Here's the data that I collected. Now let's see if we can call this evidence, for the field and everybody else. Because I've experienced way too much in my life to even question, whether or not the supernatural exists. I 100% in my mind, I've, have had physical marks on me like most of us have, when we do investigation, not pleasant things, all the physical symptoms you can get, from being in a place. And it's, like I said, and you do get, and I noticed, the longer I think you do this and the more you do it, a lot of us have physical ailments because of it, long-term like side effects.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the thing, like, you're in an area, and I've tried to describe it to people. It's like, it's not there's an obvious thing. It's not like you walk into a room and there's a fire, but you get this really heavy feeling in your chest, like you're in the deep end of the pool, or you're having almost like an asthma attack, like you can't quite pull your breaths in, like something's pressing on you. It's generally from, I don't feel actual hands on me. I've had times things like that happen, or had, items thrown at me through rooms and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really hard to explain. And like you said, it does seem like it does leave a lingering effect. And again, especially when you're dealing with something that is very, very dark, it seems like, I don't know if it attaches on you, if it draws energy, maybe all both. I don't know.
Right.
What do you feel?
Well, with me, all the years, like I said, I was doing this, I've had the shortness of breath thing. I've had the where I felt like I had to keep, doing this, like, oh, it's hard to breathe in here. The first time that I actually felt where what you're describing, that intense, like something hit me in the chest, like I hit a brick wall, I completely lost my breath, where I couldn't catch it. I had, it was amazing. About a month ago, I was the first person and investigator allowed inside the Gacy property since 1979. Yes, it's a new house built there in 1989. Gacy's house was destroyed in 1979, but this house was built right on top of where Gacy stood. And now half of it has a full-size basement. The other half we discovered through blueprints and speaking with the owners and things like that it is half of the original crawl space. Yeah. And I went Facebook Live with it. It's all on Facebook. Everybody can watch it. And it was full circle for me to do this. And, I was humbled to be asked to do it, and the first person ever. When I was walking down the stairs to go to the basement, and no, it wasn't a mental thing with me. It wasn't like, well, because you're thinking about it. No, because I'm not one of those people, And I was upstairs. I was fine. The bathroom I don't like in the new house on the property, and we found out why. It was very active. I had great EVPs, but that breath thing, when I hit the stairs to go into the basement, I started to feel weird. The breathing, like, catching my breath. When I hit that floor on the foot where they made a full basement out of it, it was like a wall.
Yeah.
And immediately hit. And I was like, doing that, okay, and it wasn't anxiety. And I just, I could not catch my breath. And I chalked it up to later, well, maybe I was having the effects of the victims. When I thought about it later, it might not have been like a environmental thing, but more of a victim, letting me feel how they felt situation, because for those that don't know, I don't want to get into detail, obviously, but
Sure.
Gacy, strangled. That was his MO, was strangulation.
Do you feel that, I was just saying, do you feel that it could have been, I mean, you say you're not gifted, but I mean, I think we are all, if something brings something to us by our body, sort of just by biofeedback, almost sort of an empathic sort of rendering of what was going on. My mind wondered, as soon as you said the other floor wasn't dug down, I'm thinking, how do they know that they got everybody?
Well, that's the thing. And I've been saying that for years. Yes, they got bodies. This I can say, because it's not, most of the victims, they were skeletal. They were, skeletons. There was nothing really left to them, because of the process that Gacy did when he would dispose of the victims. And they even said, you can't get every little finger bone, every little toe bone, unfortunately. They got what they could. Remember, these poor officers, Cook County and Des Plaines at the time, these guys were working in sub-zero temperatures in Chicago at that time. It was full of water down there, same thing. So they're in this muddy water, freezing temperatures, trying to work as fast as they can and to get as much as they could.
Did they have to use jackhammers in certain spots? I'm sorry, because it was so frozen.
Yeah, they did. Gacy did over certain areas in the crawl space. He had begun to pour concrete. That was what he was in the process of doing, was putting concrete over, because it was full. That's why the last 4 or 5 victims, it's really 5, but they never found the poor boy, were thrown into the Des Plaines River because he ran out of room. And if he would have gotten away with it, he never caught, he was going to put a second story onto that house, and in between the first and second floors, he was going to start putting bodies in between the floors.
Almost like an H.H. Holmes murder hotel.
Oh, beyond. Yeah, Holmes, let me tell you, and that's another thing. I'm a big Holmes researcher, and, they claim, he could have been up to 200 people. I really don't believe that. I've done hardcore Holmes research for Jeff Mudgett, actually, Holmes' great-great-grandson. I worked for Jeff, and, it's more realistically that maybe 30, if that. I think that Gacy was way more of a prolific serial killer, even Bundy, than Holmes was, and, yeah, Gacy was unstoppable. At one point, he was murdering one victim every 3 weeks. Yeah, to that point. So he was a machine.
When did it start to? I mean, it wasn't until like some of the kids talked, right? Until it bled over. Like the mask. Did they ever see the mask slip in public life?
With John, only in the end. When after he had confessed, what happened was he knew he was busted. The night that it all went down, he went into his defense attorney's office and he said, "I have to tell you something." And he sat in the chair and he wanted actually a drink. And his defense attorney was telling him, "John, I don't want to put up with your BS right now. I got to get home. His son was in the hospital at the time. The defense attorney's like, I don't have time for this. I don't want to hear your nonsense." And he's like, "No." And he knew then, and he saw this change. And he just spilled it all that night. Hours and hours of confession. And that's when his defense attorney claims that he saw the difference. John was that good. Like, unless John was talking about, put it this way, if you watch John in his interview, like with Walter Jacobson, completely normal. Like, innocent, he claims he's innocent, didn't do nothing, there's no monster to see. You'd have to be a person like a victim that survived or someone that he confessed to in order to see that side. That'd be it.
Well, do you think that? I mean, and I'm sure there are some. I think there's this thing, like you'll see like Dexter and things like that,
Right.
um, and that maybe they want to be caught. Do you think there was a side that he was relieved that he was caught, or do you
No.
think it was more like, man, I wish I could have just choked out a few more kids?
Yeah, I think that John Wayne Gacy is one of the, Kemper, he wanted to get caught. I'll use him as an example. He called himself in. He called from the payphone and said, "I did it, come get me." Even Bundy got extremely sloppy in the end. He decides to go to Florida to do his last murders where he knows that it's an execution state. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, there's some red flags there. With Gacy, he would say it even years later. He's like, he said it in that interview. He's like, you people act it's one of his quotes, you people act like I was going down the street swatting altar boys down like flies. He's like, you think these were good boys? He's like, you think that they deserved anything? He's like, they were dumb and stupid and they were the scum of the earth. That's how he talked about his victims. So no, John never wanted to get caught. He had no intention of it. He wanted to continue what he was doing because he thought that what he was doing, he was allowed to do that in his head. There was no, he was helping. Like he feels he was doing a service to society, on one end. And then like I said, he goes back and forth and he claims he's innocent. Then he claims that he had, and that's where it gets into where I'm going tonight. As a matter of fact, I have an investigation that he had accomplices. And he's claimed that since day one, and the police even agreed with that in the beginning. They said, there's no way. There are a couple of the guys, I don't think I can legally say their name. One I know I can't publicly. One of his workers for PDM contractors. They lived at the house with him. They had keys to the house. So you can't tell me these guys didn't know what was going on.
I mean, they could have smelled it.
Yeah, and the one that actually worked for him was Robin Gecht, who was the head of the Chicago Ripper serial killers, who a lot of people don't know who they are, which blows my mind. That those four guys are up, they're in the lexicon without being known,
Well, that is such an interesting spot. And I will say this, everybody, that you are listening to the House of Asher. And we're touching on Gacy. We're touching on just a lot of dark stuff. Hopefully, you don't have any little ones running around. We're not trying to get too descriptive. But we will get into certain dark areas of the mind. So just be aware. Now, these rippers that you were talking about, was this more of a thing where they were kind of, were they just more like a hunting party? Or were they like training like the next generation of serial killers, or what?
Yeah, this is one of the darkest. I mean, that's why I'm so shocked that not more people know about them. The way, which I will not get descriptive. If anybody's curious, just go and Google the Chicago Rippers or the Chicago Ripper crew. It was four guys. It was Robin Gecht, Andrew and Thomas Corky Ellis. They were brothers, and Eddie Spriker. Robin Gecht actually worked for John Wayne Gacy and was a serial killer as well, believe it or not. But their victims were women. They murdered 18-plus women in the Chicagoland area, 1981 to 1982. The police do believe that it was prior to that, but the first victim found was 1981. And the way that their MO was so horrific, I could never describe it on anything. Like I said, go Google it for yourself. But I will just say it has to do with torture, cannibalism, rape, brutality. It was beyond. They made Gacy look like a kindergarten teacher, and I'm not joking, with their brutality. One of the Rippers was executed. He was actually the last person to be executed in the state of Illinois in March of '99, and that's Andrew Corky Ellis. He is deceased by lethal injection. And his brother, Thomas, was actually released this past April. And if you people read what these 4 guys did together as serial killers to these 18-plus women, it will blow your mind that the courts would allow this man to walk free now in 2019. One of them. It's mind-blowing.
Well, let me ask you this real quick, and we'll get more into that. And I'm also going to ask you a few questions about a couple other serial killers, and possibly one you may not be aware of.
Right.
Where can someone, like, you'd mentioned like YouTube, you're going to be doing a live stream, right?
Right. Tonight, I'll be going live from Facebook. I'll be going live from Nevermore Supernatural, which is our main like page, and we'll also be going live from my other like page, which is called the Serial Killer Experiments. That is my own little thing, separate from my team, where I deal specifically just with the spirits of serial killers and their cases and anything supernatural that has to do with serial killers. So we'll be live tonight from both those pages at around 9 p.m. Central Standard Time from the location.
Well, let me ask you too, like if a person wanted to contact you directly with whatever, maybe they have some information on Gacy that never come out or whatever. I just want to ask you some questions about maybe the region that they live in and serial killers and whatnot. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way is go on Facebook, the Serial Killer Experiments. If you go on that like page, that's directly to me. I'm the only one that has that page that's an admin. And you can message me, or even on my personal page at Lorelei Berghr, which is connected. You could see that I'm connected to that page. Either way, you can message me that way. And we do have a YouTube. I just actually put up a brand new YouTube page, Nevermore Supernatural. So, and all of the videos are up there as well, and I can be messaged there too.
Awesome. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of like the Wendigo and all that, and where this thing attacks and kills and often consumes. And supposedly it was connected with anyone who did eat human flesh, and a demon would come into them and possess them and whatnot. Now, I know you said that you felt that some of these people had some sort of demon in them. What's the possibility of them being controlled by some sort of malevolent nature spirit?
Absolutely. Anything is possible, and that's what I try to tell people. It's true when, it's repeated all the time. None of us are experts. We don't know when it comes to the supernatural. All we can do is make hypotheses, gather data, blah, blah, blah. Like these Chicago Rippers. These guys were a little bit easier to, when you're talking about possession and things like that. They were all self-confessed. What they claimed, they were Satanists. I'm not saying anything against the Satanic Church or the actual people that are in that religion.
Right, like a demon worshiper.
Right.
Yeah.
They practiced satanic ritual. I'll make this as PG as possible with the victims as far as cannibalization during their rituals. At actually the location I'm going to tonight is where this all took place. Were they, if you're, not an expert even in that religion, and they're trying to summon things, you're right. It could be like a Wendigo, or who knows what they did. We don't know what they could have conjured up, what they could have had enter in them, how they acted. There is a few, like I said, victims of this case as well that survived attacks. And I've read their statements, and it's always the same thing. They like they were like a wild animal, like you're saying,
Well, I was just going to say the things that come to mind, like early on back in the day, because most people think of, lone serial killer walking the streets, and I don't know why I'm saying that, but it sounds like a 70s sitcom, or not a sitcom, but a docudrama, unsolved mysteries, crazed madman stalking the streets of, Twin Pines or something. But you have to remember, like the Hillside Stranglers, there were 2 guys.
Correct.
And worked in tandem.
This was a rare thing, yeah. It was rare. It was the 4 of them. And the weird thing, Robin Gecht was the ringleader, of course. And the other 3 guys all claimed in terror when they confessed to the police when they were caught. They all claimed, which I find this part so compelling. They all were crying. Not because they were caught for killing 18-plus women, but they were so afraid of Robin Gecht they claimed his supernatural powers that he obtained being a very deep into the satanic whatever he was into, that they were afraid of him, that supernaturally he was going to get them, even though they were going to get arrested and be in prison and not, near him, but for ratting him out with them.
So he would use his hoodoo or whatever.
Right.
Dark,
who knows? Yeah, this dark passenger, like Ted Bundy claimed too, like he had that dark passenger, that dark entity, thing, and that's what they claimed. They were bawling like children, is what the statements were from the police, that they were terrified of him because of what he was capable of supernaturally.
Well, I'll say this, Lorelei. I'm not saying like, oh, this is great, and this is how I want it to be, but I think by nature humans are dualistic. I think, just look at our works. We could do wonderful things. We can just make beautiful pieces of art, or we could just make genocide. Which is in maybe their mind a type of artwork. We can do really grand things and really dismal, dark, and depraved situations as well. I was going to ask you if you've ever heard of the Bible Belt Strangler. I
have heard of it, but I've never done any research on it.
Okay, I'll hit you with this if you're curious about it.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm doing which if people were curious, I hate to self-plug, but I just throw it out there. That way I don't have to explain it too much. SteveEAsher.com. It's all lowercase and together. And you'll find out about some of the new books I got coming out. Well, anyway, one of the books is touching on Kentucky counties. And I thought I would get a lot of, UFO sightings, yes. Quirky, like giant balls of twine. One of those books, it's not becoming that. It's becoming, finding out about, like Knox County, where Charles Manson lived with his prostitute mother and turned tricks and beat them, and it's one of the main places that sort of twisted him up to become who he was. But anyway, I was looking up around, I think it was in the Bluegrass region, maybe around Lexington, and there was, they never caught him. He's still out there. It's kind of like the Zodiac, and he would come through, and it was called the Bible Belt Strangler due to the fact it was in the Bible Belt, Kentucky and Tennessee area, and he killed out, I'm trying to think, quite a few. I think more than 10. I would have to look it up. But, yeah, he did all kinds of really hardcore depraved stuff to him. And I'm not throwing out a lot of information. Just for the fact that, I try to do it tastefully because I'd never know if people have kids and whatnot. And I don't want to do murder porn. You know what I'm saying? In regards to my radio show.
I hear you. It's very hard. Like, you want to inform people and you want to educate people, but when you're in this topic, in this subject, even relating to the supernatural, because that's sort of my little niche in it, is the serial killer spirits. It's hard to get people to understand exactly what you're talking about without getting graphic. It just, like I was saying, like with the Rippers and stuff, it's people go, oh, okay, the Chicago Rippers. And they're thinking like Jack the Ripper, okay, and then they know what he did to people. No, it's so much worse.
See, when you said that, like, I could see, like, I have a dark humor. I'm sorry. I'm thinking, I said that would be like an excellent name for a bowling team, or either people who drag raced or something because they rip up the street.
Oh, yeah, it's a great tag that they got. You know what I mean? And like I said, if you look up the case, it would make sense. Because why they called them that, and I understood why the media got that name for them, because they were targeting women, not all, because I'm actually friends with one of the victims' brothers. And she was a just normal girl, worked, a normal job, respectable, good kid. She just, wasn't into drugs or anything like that. But most of the victims of the Rippers were smart. They targeted a lot of prostitutes, people that would not be reported missing very quickly. You know what I mean? And like a Jack the Ripper thing, they were kind of doing that, and a lot of serial killers do. They're not the only ones. They know, well,
Marginal people, people outside of the safety net and social
Correct.
safety
The
net.
homeless, things like
Right.
that, where nobody's going to notice that they're gone for a while,
Hitchhikers, right.
and we can get away with it, for a little bit. And that's what they usually targeted, not always. And that was the weird thing about that case, was that they didn't have really, they had, the only MO that they had was the way that they killed. Always was the same. Always. And what they did afterward was always the same. But
Ritual.
why they were so hard to catch, because it was always women, but age didn't matter. Race, creed, color, religion, status in life, station in life, it didn't matter. It was literally, and it was never pre-planned with these guys. It wasn't like they stalked someone or, they'd go out cruising, and Robin Gecht, is what was stated. He was the one that would pick. And it was most of the time, and the only thing they really had in common, these 18 plus, like I said, I can't get into, and I won't get into on this show, the details of what they did, but Robin Gecht had a thing for endowed women, largely endowed women, and
curvy ladies.
Curvy women, yes. And if he'd spot a woman that met just that criteria, that was it. So that was the only criteria.
Do they happen to take like trophies, a little memento?
Yes. That's the bad part. The trophies that these guys took wasn't an object. It was a part of the victim.
The anatomy.
Yeah.
There's a guy.
And it was always the same part. It was,
you can just say the anatomic part. I mean, sexual organ?
Yes, above the waist. Yes. So it was what we were talking about, large endowment. So the left endowment was their trophy.
Why the left?
That was also the part that was cannibalized as well.
Was that sort of the left-hand path, the Satanism quality of it?
That's kind of what people guess at. It's kind of like, well, okay, when you put it right. And it, like I said, if you anybody out there, I warn you, if you go and want to investigate this case yourself and you're going to Google this, it's extremely graphic. Please be over 18 to even read this stuff and what they did, and it can scar you for life just reading what they did. This isn't, like people say, I know, I've read the Gacy stuff, I've read the Kemper and the Bundy. This is something that I don't think they could make a horror movie out of it.
Well,
would be rated like something that you could not even imagine.
Right. It's like almost like an extremely hardcore, borderline violent sexual, type of thing. Up to like a snuff film, more or less.
Absolutely. Like I said, what they did was, even now, if you can believe this, and it's the truth, if you guys read this, you'll see it was worse than Jeffrey Dahmer.
Jesus.
Worse. Way worse.
I wonder if they were trying to outdo each other in brutality. You know how guys are competitive.
Well, with Robin Gecht, what the three other guys always claimed, they partook because, and they all do this. We know how the MO goes. They all did it because they didn't have a choice. Robin made them do it. That kind of a thing.
Just following orders.
Right. But Robin Gecht, what they claim was that once he'd start, it was unstoppable. It was like watching somebody, this raving lunatic, sadistic, like madman, when he would go, because he would always usually be the first to, usually, not always, but do the attack, and then once he had the victim subdued, then he would bring the others, is what they claim, then the other three could partake. And it wasn't always the four of them. Sometimes it was two of them or three of them, or Robin by himself, or, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's something. And to do this investigation tonight, like I said, is going to be, and I want people to understand, what I do. I don't do these investigations for the morbidity or to bother victims or anything like that. It has nothing to do with the victims. I always like to believe in my heart that because they're victims, I pray that they're at peace, that they've, found whatever. When I do these serial killer investigations, I'm going after one thing and one thing only. I'm going after the serial killer. And when I get a call and reports that there's major activity at a location, the serial killer has since deceased, like Andrew, one of them has passed away, I'm going there to investigate the claims about him being there. And that's who I want communication with,
Right.
If I happen to if a victim does come through an EVP, that's a different story. I'll do everything I can to communicate with them and then to help them or whatever they would like to say. But that's not why I do it. And there's also scientific reasons behind it. I do truly believe after 20 plus years, when you're dealing with a serial killer spirit, it's a completely different situation than a normal human being, just as when they were alive. It's a different psychological mind frame.
I think it would even be more extreme through the fact that you're
Correct.
no longer bound to the flesh.
Correct. And that's what I have found while investigating them for all these years, that the experience is completely different. The evidence they give is completely different. It's much more extreme. And people would think they'd be more violent toward an investigator, and they haven't. It's literally better evidence. They have the capability of all the data that I've collected and compared to regular spirits or situations or whatever it may be, that their EVPs are louder and stronger, that it's more energy somehow.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you real quick because we've got maybe 8 minutes because I know you have to get to your investigation, and I'm again in your debt for being on, and I appreciate it.
Oh, I love it. I could do this with you all night. Trust me.
Well, I hope to have you back on, especially after you do this in a few months, whenever you have some time.
Definitely.
Like I said, I could talk about this all day, and it's not like you said in a creeper kind of way. It fascinates me. I probably would have wanted to be a sociologist, if I hadn't went into corrections and stuff. But
right. And that's me. I study forensic psychology. This has been part of my life, my whole life. You know what I mean?
Right.
So. Yeah.
This is your normal. Well, what I was going to say first, I was kind of going to joke, is like, are you available for children's parties? But it's just one of those things where that's where you're supposed to laugh.
Oh, I didn't even hear you, and I'm sorry. The phone cut out for a second. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I said, well, first of all, are you available for children's parties?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, okay. I'm booking. You can book me anytime.
That's it.
I could make it pretty much G-rated if I had to,
Man, that would be a hard sell for real. But when you go out, I apologize. I don't know as much about your background as I should. I don't know if you're married or whatever. But when you go out and stuff like that, the people automatically go, so tell me about, who had the most heads? Who was found with the most heads?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Was there anybody?
Yeah. My family, they're used to me. My mother, like I said, she's been dealing with me with this since I was a little child, so to the family, this is the normal, for me, it's like, oh, that's Lorelei, but yeah, new people that I meet, it's very hard to explain to people, everybody out there that's a paranormal investigator or supernatural investigator, whatever you label yourself, it's hard enough to tell people that. Even today, even though it's mainstream now, it's still a weird kind of thing to bring up, like, hey, by the way, I investigate the supernatural. But then when I have to put in there, but I specialize in serial killers, and then you either get the, oh, okay, and they run, or you get the ones that they want to know everything. Yeah. Every detail, and I know every detail, so I'm like, well, if you really want to know,
Yeah, so, buckle up.
Yeah, it's like, I'll tell you, but, don't get mad at me when you can't sleep tonight.
Yeah, don't be calling me 3 a.m. and go, why'd you tell me that?
Yeah, it's like, don't be calling me, you wanted to know. So it's like, imagine how I am. It's like, I'm so desensitized to it now, like I said, because I studied forensic psychology and things like that. I can disassociate, with the cases, and I'm able to put that in a different part of my brain when I'm not investigating or researching, and I can go to bed at night, and or else you'd go mad, so.
Right. Well, let me ask you, Lorelei, like if there was a bucket list of serial killers.
Yeah.
Okay. Who was one you would want to get, and where would a guy like Richard Speck be on the scale of like least evil to most evils?
Richard Speck, the way that I tell people, I have my own little classifications. Richard Speck to me was not a serial killer, and not because of the. Here, let me do it real quick. I don't believe that you're made a serial killer by the amount of victims that you have. Serial killer is a thought process. It's a type of brain. It's the thinking. It's the way that the mind works. You could be a serial killer and have one victim, okay? Or you could be a spree or a mass murderer and have 20 victims. It's about the mindset. Richard Speck was not a serial killer. Richard Speck was a spree killer. He didn't know that many girls were in there. It surprised the hell out of him. He walked in the door to rob a place. There's 9 women. Well, he just decided to off them all and do what he did. But his mindset when he was profiled by the FBI, by Quantico, they even said Richard Speck is not a serial killer at all. So, and same with I have to say it, Son of Sam, Berkowitz. That's not a serial killer to me. He was a spree killer, driving around with a gun, killing people because the dog told him to do it. It's a deep psychological difference.
Nuances.
Big time.
A lot of little, like you said, just little things that tip it one way or the other. What's the difference between, say, a spree killer, serial killer, and, like, say, just a thrill killer, and like a real loose, tight little bow? What you can kind of tell me, what would be like the thing that says this is the one thing that sets this one apart from that?
Absolutely. A serial killer usually, everything is very, very methodically premeditated. There is ritual involved. There is MO involved. There is different, there's a mindset. There is this pre-planning. There is this fantasy. There is sexuality involved. You've got to put all this together. So you'd look at a typical serial killer. You can usually say all of them, it began in childhood. There was something wrong there. You've all heard about animal torture, things like that. Or John Wayne Gacy, he didn't torture animals, though. He loved them. But he had a tic as a child. At 6 years old, he would steal his mother's silk underwear, and he would bury them underneath the porch in the ground, like he would later do with his victims.
That's freaky.
There's always this pattern, and it's deep-rooted psychological patterns since childhood. And if you look back and you learn, they are their own separate situation. Spree killers are the type of guys like a Richard Speck. Yeah, he wasn't all there. He was a killer. But Richard Speck didn't, sit in his basement and have these dark fantasies of, finding 9 nurses and doing what he did. And he was going to rob them. He was broke, and he was a sexual offender as well. It was like.
Well, he had a drug habit too, right?
Oh, severe. Yeah. He was a street guy. He was just like, hey, I need some money. I need my dope for the night.
I thought he was a male prostitute too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It just,
yeah.
Speck said it himself. He didn't expect it. It was like it just happened so fast. Yeah. That's not a serial killer.
Well, the thing that, and I'm going to let you go because I know we're getting right at that time. You have a guy I don't know how familiar you are with like punk rock or whatever from back in the day, but D.D. Ramone for the Ramones, he was, in the really seedy part of New York, like when New York was like really hardcore, and
Oh yeah.
he had to turn tricks and do stuff to get dope and all that. But for whatever reason, his wiring didn't send him that way. He very well could have went taxi driver and did all this and that. But like you said, I guess it is a type of brain.
Yeah, you're right. You come to Chicago. I mean, everybody knows about Chicago now. They're killing these drug addicts and gangbangers and whatever. They're killing each other every day. They don't make the news as this big, prolific serial killer because they know now. It's like, no, they're not serial killers. A lot of them are drug addicts, dope fiends, whatever, in a gang. They don't have the serial killer mind, even though they could have killed 50 people in their lifetime. That'd be like saying about, and I can say this because I'm Chicago and I'm Italian, there's my little joke. Yeah, that'd be like saying that every mob hitman, they're serial killers because they killed more than 3 people. It's like, no, they don't. They're just killers,
Yeah, that's just a day at work.
Right, it's work for them, and it's like, yeah, and that was like H.H. Holmes as well. H.H. Holmes, a lot of people don't realize, Holmes killed for profit.
He was a capitalist. I mean,
yeah, he was, he'd get them skeletons, he'd sell them, he'd articulate them, he'd sell them to Hanneman College in Chicago, or get an insurance policy out on you and then take you out and collect the money.
That's it. Well,
he didn't have that typical serial killer thought process,
Okay. Well, I've got you a little bit over an hour. Can you give me, like, the person, like, on your bucket list that you maybe wish you could have spoken to or profiled or whatever?
It would have been Gacy. Gacy or Holmes, one of the two. Yeah, either one. But I'm leaning more toward Gacy because of the personal history with that and the family and things. But Holmes, as far as intrigue, wanting to know exactly the truth. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if he would have. You would have had sort of a Clarice type situation where he would kind of be engendered towards you. You good Catholic girl and whatnot,
right.
and maybe he saw something in relation to his family, young women in his family that he wanted to protect.
Right.
I wonder.
Yeah, because Gacy didn't hate women. He loved his mother, he loved his sisters. Yeah, and I have no fear of profiling. To be in a room, you could lock me in a room with any of them, even Kemper right now. If I had the opportunity, I would go in a heartbeat and profile and interview him without hesitation. It just the human mind fascinates me, period. But especially when it's broken like that, and what makes it broken. That's what I love to try to find out, and what causes them to be like they are, and then in death as well. They cross over. Okay, they're here.
Yeah.
Do they still think like that? Are they still having those urges, and then but being a spirit that they can't even live out their urges anymore? So what does that do to them?
Or maybe
these
whatever.
are all the questions.
Maybe whatever baggage they had, they let go of it. And if you believe in, say, maybe reincarnation, maybe that was something they were trying to work out.
Right.
Maybe they were in a victim situation, and maybe they felt they had to go really heavy into it, to whatever stuff. I mean, that doesn't justify it, obviously, but
no,
there's a lot of ways it could go. But Lorelei, thank you so much for being here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to do a quick outro. If you want to stick around for a minute, that's fine. If you got to go, I understand that too.
I can hang around, and thank you so much for having me. I'd love to come back anytime.
Absolutely. So.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh my God, people. That was awesome. Lorelei Berghr. Smart lady. As my dad would have said, that's one smart cookie. That's one tough broad. And I say that with all kindness. But listen, guys, if you are in the part of the world where it's still very sunny, I want you to go out there and enjoy your day. Take in all that nature has out there. But as the sun sets behind the tall pines and the shadows grow long, make sure to check in your closet, under your bed, out your back hallway, maybe in your crawl space. You might find some weirdo's grandma's panties in there, or maybe part of her hip bone. I don't know. But you know what? It's okay, because sometimes in fear there is learning. But as long as we stay focused, everything's gonna be gravy, baby. So until next time, everybody, stay scared.